Yeah.
All right, so I will start us off with introducing Dr. Paulo Boggio to speak with us today. And he earned his doctorate in neuroscience and behavior at USP in 2007, and he's currently the director of the Social and Cognitive Neuroscience Lab at Mackenzie Presbyterian University in Sao Paulo, Brazil, where he's a professor at the School of Psychology. Paulo has experience in psychology with an emphasis on cognitive, social, and affective neuroscience. He has published more than 160 papers in international journals such as Nature Human Behavior, the Journal of Neuroscience, Scientific Reports, Emotion, Behavioral Research Methods, and Brain Stimulation, and so on. He also has published 5 books and 39 book chapters and has been well funded by from multiple agencies. So needless to say, we're very excited to have him here today to talk about his recent work. And I've had the honor of getting to work on a massive international collaboration with Paulo during the pandemic, and I believe he'll be presenting data from that study too. So I'm excited to see the data this way myself as well. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming him as he presents The Pandemic as a Time for Moral Actions.
Okay, hello everybody. So first of all, I would like to thank Professors Jim and Meltem for inviting me to present this talk. The initiative to bring together research from all around the world to talk about moral psychology is awesome and could not have come at a better time. It's an excellent opportunity, I think, for both to share ideas and experience and also to create an international community by bringing together people from different groups, from different backgrounds. And also I think this is great because this initiative is giving voice to groups that are outside the main research poles. For, in my case, I'm Brazilian doing research in Brazil, and you can imagine all the political and economic challenges. You can imagine what we are suffering here, and research are generally scarce, and in recent years, this has gotten a lot worse. But let's keep moving on and fighting against all this. So thank you, Melden, for this so kind introduction, and thank you again for inviting me. So as Melden said, I'll say some words about the pandemic as a time for moral action. And so let's start with some words from the director of WHO. Let's listen what he said at the beginning of the pandemic.
We're learning what works and what doesn't. That's why behavioral science is so important. It helps us to understand how people make decisions so we can support them to make the best decisions for their health.
So it's a call for social scientists. It's a call for behavioral scientists to help in the fight against the pandemic. So as early as March 2020, Jay Van Bevel and Robbie Wheeler, they formed a group of scientists from areas such as psychology, sociology, anthropology, political science, neuroscience, so among much others. And we published this article that you can see at the screen in Nature Human Behavior, pointing out different aspects that should be considered for the effective fight against the pandemic. It was based on previous studies, previous catastrophes, other pandemics that you know from history, data from lab experiments. So it was a review of the literature and what we learned at that point that could help us to fight the pandemic. We discussed things like threat perception, leadership, social communication, and many other issues. But then we decided to go further, and Jay gave the start. And together with Mark Alfano and Alex Sishok, Valerio Capraro, Hauger, and me, we created an international research network in the area. So we designed a study covering topics such as risk behavior, politics, morality, conspiracy theories, generosity, and many other things. And after creating that, Jay went to the Twitter and tweeted a call inviting anyone interested to participate in this study. It was something super different. And it was amazing because in less than 10 days, we have the international collaboration on the social and moral psychology of COVID-19. With more than 230 researchers, Meldam is one of them, and from 67 countries, and we collect data from something around 50,000 participants. And so it was a massive study, and that it started with a small group, and in a few days we have an amazing group from all around the world. And today I will talk about data relating the moral concern and COVID. So at the screen you can see a cartoon. It's a cartoon from a piece published at the Washington Post, and this article was entitled "The Great Experiment." Indeed, the COVID-19 pandemic is the largest natural behavior change experiment in recent memory. So we're in the middle of a huge human experiment. And dealing with it has required people all around the world to change their habits and engage in new behaviors to protect not only themselves, but also other people. And although many changes in health behavior have been framed as self-protective, so you need to take care because you can get sick, they also tend to require a personal sacrifice to benefit others. Can you imagine you in lockdown, your kids in your home, everybody doing online classes, and many other people losing their jobs and everything we can imagine. And this poses a question: is the pandemic a moral issue? As we are thinking that your behavior is not for you, but also for others. Is the pandemic a moral issue? And then we start thinking about it on this project. Before moving on, let's just say some words about Brazil. And then I think it'll be clear that pandemic is really a moral issue. So we have many sentences, and I think some of you that follow the news from Brazil probably listened to some of them. We have a president that is a denial of the COVID. And for example, after being asked about the high number of deaths by COVID in Brazil, he just said, "And so what?" Then after he say, "Oh, Brazilians must not be sissies. We all are going to die one day. So come on." This is the president talking. And then after he say, "Brazilians need to stop winning," and deaths just getting high and high. We are the second country with higher number of deaths. So it's a tragedy here in Brazil. Almost 600,000 people died from COVID here in Brazil. It's such a tragedy. And so when we look at this sentence, we can start thinking that there is a moral issue happening here. It's evident that this guy is not morally concerned about the population. He's just concerned about himself and people around him. So here's an example of a moral issue in a high rank position. So it's a president. So let's discuss this a little bit. So it's a moral issue. We could spend hours discussing here what is the best definition of moral and morality, and we should, but we don't have enough time to do that. So we could spend several hours discussing different models and theories. And again, we don't have all the time. So for those interested in a kind of cartography of morality, I do recommend a great book edited by Kurt Gray and Jess Graham. It's called The Atlas of Moral Psychology. You have a real nice view of the state of art of morality these days, and different perspectives, different theories. But for the moment, let's just take a general definition to start our discussion and try to figure out if the pandemic is really a moral issue or not. I like a definition presented by Melon Killen and Aldo Dahl in a chapter published on this Atlas of Moral Psychology, and they say that our model is a social science one, drawing on philosophical categories to define morality as prescriptive norms about how others ought to treat one another with respect to justice, fairness, others' welfare, equality, and rights. Adding to this definition is the comprehension that morality serves a kind of tool in matters of cooperation and conflict resolution. This view has been advocated recently by Oliver Curry and colleagues. And if you take a deep dive in history, you see that these ideas have some tradition from Aristotle to Hume to Rawls and many other philosophers. So taking all this together, it looks like the pandemic is a moral issue. And we have argued in that paper I show at the beginning of my presentation. We say something like, it's the sentence there: fighting a global pandemic requires large-scale cooperation. The problem is that by definition, cooperation requires people to bear an individual cost to benefit other people. In particular, there is a conflict between short-term self-interest versus long-term collective interest. So as such, the tendency to perceive and engage with issues through the lens of collective welfare, so morality, is likely to play a critical role in compliance with public health measures during a pandemic. So it looks like we do have a moral issue when we are talking about the pandemic. So what aspects of morals matter? So what you should look if we are thinking to address some issues about the pandemic in moral terms. So let's start with some easy questions, like who am I? So it's an easy question. Everybody, I think, has the perfect answer to. I'm just kidding. So it's hard questions. So who am I? What do I value? Who do I care about? So let's just think for a while. How do you think you are? So you guys are listening to this talk right now. So just think for a while. Are you guys caring, compassionate? Are you guys helpful? Are you guys honest, kind? With whom do you care about? So are you worried? Are you worried about you and your close ones only? Or do you care about your friends? Do you care about your community, about your country, about people from your continent, about people from the universe? Or are you more focused on just your close ones or more extended circles? And when you think about the pandemic, is it clear that your action is not isolated from other people's actions and that it ends as a sum? So if you think on those things like zero-sum game, so your action and all actions together is a zero or a non-zero sum game. So if let's think on vaccination. So if everybody is getting vaccinated, it's not a zero sum game, it's a positive sum game. So that's the issue. Do you value debts of care? Do you value forgiveness? Do you value humility and conformity? So all these things seems to matter for fighting the pandemic. And to address these issues, we select three main variables to include in our study. We select moral identity, morality as cooperation, and the extension of the moral circle. So all these questions that I put now, in somehow they tackle these particular aspects of morality. So moral identity, morality as cooperation, and the extension of the moral circle. So let's start with moral identity. And so do you see morally require actions as part of your core identity? So this is an interesting question. So how important being a moral person is for your personal identity? There are some nice papers published by Nina Strominger about self and moral identity. So a kind of social self is quite of superimposed by moral self. It's quite interesting papers about it. So how important is to be a moral person for you? And if you look at moral identity, we can take different perspectives, but we took this one that considered two main aspects. So we could call two dimensions of moral identity. One is internalization, and the other one is symbolization. So what I mean internalization is what I'm saying, it refers to how important moral virtues such as compassion, fairness, care are to yourself, are important to your self concept, like a private aspect of yourself. And by symbolization, I'm referring to how important it's for you to express these characters to the outside world. So like wearing a t-shirt showing that you do like community work or something like that. So showing that you care about morality. So one is for yourself and the other is for the external. So it's a public aspect of the self. And to put in more practical terms, we use the inventory of moral identity that is comprised by these two dimensions that I told you. And people have to read some sentence and evaluate it. Something like, it would make me feel good to be a person who has these characteristics. Being someone who has these characteristics is an important part of who I am. I often wear clothes that identify me as having these characters. So several sentences that we can at the end have two dimensions of moral identity, internalization and symbolization. It's interesting to see that some previous research suggests, and there is some reference at the screen, that internalization is a stronger predictor of prescriptive moral actions than symbolizations. And whereas for prescriptive, both symbolization and internalization are important. So this is interesting. So internalizing moral identity is also positively related to pro-social behavior and people's views of humanity. This is another interesting issue. So in our study, we consider that moral identity would be positively associated with physical distance, physical hygiene, and support for public policy. So considering the idea of the whole of internalization on prescriptive norms. This is important, and I will say something in advance, because most of our measures were taken in a prescriptive format. So like washing my hands longer than usual. So we provide sentence that is more in a prescriptive format. So we expected that that moral identity internalization would have a better impact, a higher impact on it. Then we have the morality as cooperation.
I'm gonna pause for a second. It sounds like the slides are a bit blurry. I'm on a very small screen, so it looks okay to me, but is there a way maybe we can reshare the screen?
Okay, sure.
See if it's clear for everyone.
Okay, yeah. Let me do it again. Let me know.
I think it might still be a little bit blurry, but oh, it's better now.
Yeah?
Yes.
It's better? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know what it was, but I'm sorry if it was my fault. Sorry. So is that fine? Can I keep moving? Okay, thank you, man. So the other aspect that we looked for in this study is the morality as cooperation. So the theory of morality as cooperation considers morality as a set of stable biological and cultural solutions to recurrent social challenges, and the pandemic is one of these. So it's a huge challenge that we need to do. And the theory puts that the most important moral concerns are about actions that pose solutions to cooperative dilemmas. And as I said before, so this theory is much based on the lens of non-zero-sum games. And along these points, the pandemic response can be considering a non-zero game. So as I said before, let's think about people doing or not doing physical distance, people getting vaccinated or not getting vaccinated, people washing their hands or not, using masks or not. So if you think it as a zero-sum game, then we have a problem. So we need to take as a non-zero-sum game, and to fight the pandemic, we need to consider we need to have a positive game at the end. So most people using masks, people getting vaccinated. Otherwise, we are in a real trouble. It's interesting to see that some studies have been published during this time. You know, there is a lot of papers being published about the pandemics, and there are some interesting examples to share with you guys. So, for example, you can see at the screen the paper. So, for example, so pro-social people are more likely to engage in health behavior, and pro-social messages can be effective in increasing tensions to engage in preventive behavior, such as wearing masks and practicing physical distance. So it looks that there is a connection between pro-social and the engage in preventive behavior. So here we consider that the extent to which people think of morality in terms of cooperation may be associated with greater support for public health measures during the pandemic. So this is our second variable. And finally, we arrive at moral circles. And moral circles, I will explain it really brief in 20 seconds video clip from this movie. So you got the idea of what moral circles is all about.
With the knowledge you've been given, you are now on the inside of what I like to call the Burns family circle of trust. See, if I can't trust you, Greg, then I have no choice but to put you right back outside the circle. And once you're out, you're out. There's no coming back.
Well, I would definitely like to stay inside the circle.
So I think you got the idea of moral circles. Here's from this movie. It's a comedy movie, but originally it's from the first movie, Godfather. First movie is the first scene of Godfather. So Buonasera is the guy that appeared to the Godfather, asking him to kill a guy that hurt his daughter, and Godfather just say, "Come on, you come here to my house. You're never my friend. You all the time say the police in US would take care of you, so you don't need my friendship, and now you are asking me for some help." So that's the idea of moral concern. Are you concerned about a restrict group of friends, people that are close to us, or are we worried about an extended group? So the question here is, here is a great book. I think most of you already read. It's not a new book. It's from Peter Singer. It's a great book about the extended circle. So who deserves our consideration and care? So that's an important question. The variation of this question can be from restrictive family ties, usually involving kinship, to friends, stranger, animals, all living beings, rocks, the universe, everything. So you can go from a restricted family ties to the whole universe. So we can understand this circle as being concentric, so ranging from a small circle to a more universal circle. So we can think on this in terms of parochialist versus universalist. So we are more parochial or we are more universal. And this is also important in a pandemic. So if I'm just thinking on my close ones, I'm doing the right thing I should do. So if I'm vaccinated and my daughter and my wife, they are vaccinated, and I'm just thinking, okay, we're fine now. So, and I'm not worried about the others. Maybe we are not going to have the best findings that you should in the pandemic. So we need to think in more extended concern. So our concern should be extended to more people than just me. So can you imagine in Brazil, I told at the beginning, so the president was not worried about his people, because at the end his answer is about that. So I don't care. So what was the problem of the population? They will all die at the end. So what's the problem? So I am worried about my small circle, or I'm worried with an extended circle. So that's an important question that we also try to address here. And we hypothesized that people who endorse a wider moral circle will also show a higher positive engagement on our outcome measures of pandemic response. So after this brief introduction, let's talk about the survey and about this study. So we have those three main variables that I presented right now, and we have our outcomes. So let's talk a little bit of this. So at the screen, you have the just a drawing showing the variables. So everything was administered online, and each participant completed a series of psychological measures and self-report public health behaviors. And our first predictor was moral identity, then morality as cooperation, and then moral circles. These are predictors. And we have as our outcome variables, we include three measures of public health support. So a physical distancing scale consisting of some items. So something like, during the days of the coronavirus pandemic, I have been staying at home as much as practically possible. So that was one of the questions. We have a physical hygiene scale, something like, during the days of the coronavirus pandemic, I have been washing my hands longer than usual. It was another sentence. And we also have a policy support scale consisting of some items. And an example is like, during the days of the coronavirus pandemic, I have been in favor of closing all schools and universities. And people should just address as strongly agree to strongly disagree. So we collected this data. So we have our predictor as, so morality as cooperation, moral identity, and moral circles. And you have these three outcomes. So physical distance, so contact, physical hygiene, and support for public policies. Here's an idea of the study. So as I said, it was a worldwide study with data collected from all continents. And it was approximately 5,000 volunteers, 50,000 volunteers, and everything was translated in multiple languages for each country that was involved in the experiment. So all this data, just one second, I think Meltdown is freezed in my screen. I don't know if you're seeing me or not, or, oh, it's fine. Okay, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I was worried that I had some connection issues here. Okay, that's fine. Sorry. You can freeze again if you want. Sorry. So our data were analyzed with a series of mood level random coefficient models, and following the guidelines of Professor John Naslak, that his picture is on the screen. He's a nice guy. And indeed, John conducted this analysis with me, or to put in a more correct words, I was just there learning direct from an amazing source of knowledge in this type of analysis. John is a great guy, and I'm super grateful of knowing him and learning from all his experience on this kind of analysis. So to test our hypothesis, we examined person-level relationship between the three COVID protection measures, so our outcomes that I said earlier, and our predictors, so the moral variables. So in this model, person you are seeing at the screen are the A, indexed by A, are nested within countries denoted by J, and then a set of coefficients and intercept and the slopes are estimated for each country, and then we go analyzing this thing. So let's take a look at the findings. So here is a map showing, so at the columns you see limited contact, hygiene, and policy support, and at the rows you can see our moral variables. And this heat index so you can follow it. So reddish color means positive associations. I mean, higher scores reflect stronger relationship between moral identity and the other variables. So, and bluish is the other side, so it's the negative, and the gray color represents countries for which we didn't collect any data. So if you take a look at it, moral identity internalization was significantly and positively related to physical distance. You can see here at this plot here. So the more individuals value having a moral self-concept, the more they support measures to combat the pandemic. When you looked at the moral identity symbolization, so here this row here, it was positively related to improve hygiene only, not the other variables. And then we go to morality as cooperation. And again, they are positively related to endorsing public policies, limiting physical distance and improving physical hygiene. And finally, we have the moral circle. It was also positively and significantly related, but a small effect size you can see by the colors. You have an idea. But just to put in numbers now, to have an idea in numbers, we computed effect size as the percentage reduction in the person life. So we took the person level variance associated with the inclusion of a set of predictors, and then we computed the effect size by taking the residual level one variance from a model with the predictors to a model without the predictors, so the new models, and then you compute the variance. And at the end we had, so just to summarize, individuals' morality accounted for around 10% for contact, 10% for hygiene, and 6% for public policy. So putting these moral variables together. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so here. But people watching this presentation, I think, okay, but these are all self-reported, and at the end are all correlations. Yeah, that's an important limitation. And then we try to at least improve our study by taking some actual behavior and actual behavior number, and you do that including 2 extra studies. And the first one is using the Google Community Mobility Report. So to move beyond mere self-reports, we did a correlation analysis between physical mobility and our moral variables. So we took our morality as cooperation, moral identity, and moral circles, and correlated with Google mobility. And Google mobility, I don't know if people are all used to it. So it indicates how people's movement has changed during the pandemic. So there is a baseline before the pandemic, and then we can have, for example, we decided, okay, let's look at April 2020, the time that we collect this data. And we look at the percentage of this period compared to a baseline pre-pandemic. So you have this variation. Then, of course, you need to take care of weekends, holidays in different countries. So there is several things that you need to have in mind. And this index, they provide some values such as movement on recreation, groceries, pharmacy, parks, transit stations, workplaces. So we have some different dimensions of mobility. And so we compared these, we correlate this Google mobility with our variables. And let me show you. So the analysis were made with 66 countries because it was the number of countries who had available data for both morality variables and the Google scores. And in line with our predictions, higher moral identity, internalization, and also symbolization were negatively correlated with community mobility. So you can see at this screen here and here. So as higher the internalization, less movement around the cities. So there is this negative correlation. The same thing the same thing with here, we can see here with moral circle, and a marginally negative correlation with moralities cooperation. So it's in the same direction of our main experiments. After that, we did another correlation with Google Mobility, but instead of using our data, we used data from the World Value surveys. So we took some measures collected from this huge survey, the World Value surveys, and compare and correlated Google Mobility. So we we went to the World Value survey and picked some items that were related to the concepts we were studying. So in the World Wave survey, they collected the 10 dimensions of Salem-Schwartz theory, you know, that the theory that have self-direction, power, security, hedonism, benevolence, and many other, the 10 dimensions from Schwartz theory. So we selected items more closely related to our studies, moral variables. So we took benevolence, conformity, and universalism. So just to put in the terms that he used, so benevolence, it's important to this person to do something for the good of society, and conformity is important to this person to always behave properly, and universalism, looking after the environment, is important to this person to care for nature and save life research. So we picked these three measures as it was quite close to our main moral variables. And then we conducted another correlation analysis, these variables with the Google Mobility. And again, we find these things. So again, in line with our predictions, higher scores on benevolence, conformity, and universalism were positively correlated with community mobility. So all these finds offer additional support for our finds that moral concern is related to a greater change in behavior in compliance with public health policies, and that is it. So here is a COVID party. We are watching all these things around the world. So white people get together in parts, do not wear face masks, do not support public policies to combat the pandemic. And we don't have the answer for these specific questions, but we found that moral concerns might be a factor that contributes to explaining why some people engaged in the collective actions needed to fight the pandemic while others do not. I show some data about that. So in our case, we show that three aspects of moral concern predict support for policy measures to fight the pandemic. And also we enhance this comprehension by showing that it indeed correlate with actual behavior, the Google Mobility data, and also another stable measure, the world value measures, also correlated positively with these findings on action behavior. So seen as a whole, we could suggest that variation in moral concern might help explain some of this variation in public reactions to the pandemic. So why people are following everything that is needed to fight the pandemic and why others are not following. So these are our main predictors. And but we are looking from this perspective, but that start off, is the glass half empty or half full? So we can look at these moral issues by another and complementary perspective. And there is a really interesting paper from Amy Nivet and colleagues, and they found it in a Swiss sample of young adults that social potential as something like low acceptance of moral rules, legal cynicism, low shame, low guilt, low self-control, and other things associated with non-compliance to physical hygiene and social distance. So if you look at these things here, so you are going to see moral disengagement, low moral norms, not following rules. So Here we are looking at the other side of this same coin. So this is a complementary perspective that make us think that it really looks that morality matters in how we fight the pandemic. And is that obvious that moral concern has an important role to play in COVID response? So what are talking here? So I'm just talking obvious things. So everybody knows that, everybody thinks on that. So it's an obvious questions. And when we look at real life, it does not seem so obvious. We see many policymakers that are trying to solve the situation or improve the situation by other approach. So many of them are appealing, for example, to people self-interest. So they are thinking that appealing to self-interest would be effective. What I mean, we are seeing, for example, in many places, people offering economic incentives to get people vaccinated. So you go there and you participate in a lottery and you have more chance to win a $1 million lottery, or people are giving you a beer or something like that. So they are trying to incentivize people, but targeting the self-interest, not the collective. And then it's interesting. This morning, my colleague Halfger, it's part of this study, sent me a message and talking about that, and he directed me to this paper, and quite interesting. This guy, they decide to analyze what is happening. Is there a positive association between incentive of self-interest and better outcomes for the COVID? And this study suggested that offering economic incentives didn't work. So no positive effect on vaccination rates. So when you think, is that obvious? It looks not too obvious, at least for the level of the policymakers. They are not doing in that direction. So what we're showing here is that COVID responses isn't just about concern for oneself, but also about moral concern for others. So this is an important aspect. So what are the next steps? So as I said, it's a correlation study, so we need to move on. And the suggestion that we have from our findings that maybe we could try to foster individual morality. So maybe we could try to foster more identity. Maybe we could try to foster cooperation and try to foster values of benevolence and universalism. So at that screen, so the first paper, if you look here at the left, at the top left, there is a paper that showed that situational cues can activate access to moral identity, including moral behaviors. Just below it, the authors found that expressing appreciation to pro-social actions increase prosociality in individuals with lower levels of moral identity. So that looks like an interesting way to move. And finally, at the right side is a paper from Lange Libran, and that found that promoting pro-social actions can be done with the mere presence of individuals recognized for their high moral identity. So that's quite interesting thing. So there are some experience from before the pandemic that can provide some lessons that we could try in situations, in dramatic situations like this one that you are all suffering. So new studies should test the effects of, for example, messages to increase the salience of moral identity, and whether such manipulation enhance support of anti-COVID-19 measures. This could be tested in not just on the politics, how they talk to the population, but also how people communicate science, how people communicate the news, and all these things. So to end my presentation, I would like to make some acknowledgements. So nothing can be done alone, and at the sprint is the team that is working on this moral concern aspects of this study. So John Naslak, Mark Alfano, Flavio Azevedo, Valério Capraro, Alexandra Sishoka, Philip Spornemets, Gabriel Rego, Valdir Sampaio, Hauger. I'm sorry, Hauger, if you are watching this talk, I need really some lessons on how to say your name, and Jay. And so I need to thank all of these guys that put all this together, and also some acknowledgement for the funding agents that support my work here in Brazil. So CAPES, CNPq, FAPESP, and Mackenzie, my university, and my lab, the Social Cognitive Neuroscience Lab. So thank you again, Madam, and thank you all that are there watching this presentation. So thank you.
All right, so we can start our Q&A session. If people can add their questions to Q&A, or I believe they can raise their hands. Right now we have one question from Eduardo Galante. Do we need to have affection with the person to be moral?
Sorry, do you?
Do we need to have affection with the person to be moral?
Affection. Oh, that's an important issue. It's like we could think in terms of empathy or something like that. So I think it's more like that. So this is interesting because sometimes we think that that empathy solves all the problems, but then when we look at reality, there is a lot of things related to in-group and out-group, and sometimes we care more about people that are from our in-group and our close ones, and then we care more about them, and then our moral concern is more related to that. So that is something, that question, Eduardo, is really interesting. How could we enhance the moral concerns further, so much broader than just our moral circles? This is an important question, and there are several papers on how we can move around different groups, particularly if we think in terms of coalitions. And so we can make coalitions with other groups, so we can try to figure out a way to, so like I am a soccer fan of this team, and you are a soccer fan of that other team. I don't care about you, you don't care about me, but then we can think in terms of, oh, but we both are soccer fans, and now we are going to take care of each other against the tennis fans. So it's a simplistic view that I'm putting now, but that's the idea. So how we make these collisions and how we can navigate between different groups, making a huge in group. And Eduardo is a Portuguese or a Brazilian name. I don't know, probably it's from, I don't know if he's from Brazil. If he's from Brazil and he followed yesterday, so that's the question. So yesterday there was a manifestation against the president here in Brazil, and that was the question. So I am from this political party, you are from that one, but we are all at the same side now because you need to go against this president. But someone will say, no, I'm pure enough to not mix with this guy. So that's the issue, how we can increase the size of our moral groups and then take care of more people than just our close ones.
All right, the next question is from Lucia or Lucia. How do you explain that moral circle was less associated with social distancing, hygiene, or endorsement of political measures?
How I?
So you can also find these at the Q&A pop-up screen, but I can read it again. How do you explain that moral circle was less associated with social distancing, hygiene, or endorsement of political measures?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It's hard to explain. It was it was significant, but it was a weak association between these measures. So, and yeah, I don't know exactly how to address this, Lucia. It's, yeah, I don't know exactly. We have a small correlation, but it was the smaller one between these variables. Yeah.
Those are all the questions we had in the Q&A. Does anybody want to raise their hand and ask more questions?
Yeah. I'm still thinking on Lucia question. Yeah.
Otherwise, I have a methods question
Okay.
relating to the
Go for it.
Google mobility measures.
Okay.
So are these generally collected just as a, like from get-go? If you're using anything Google on your phone, these are collected. So it just,
If you accept it.
okay.
Yeah, because when you start install all apps on your phone, sometimes they ask you about, oh, are you allowing me to follow all your steps? Or just when you are using this app. So there is all these questions. And then if you say yes for these questions, they are following you for everything. So it's everything is anonymous, of course. And we don't have any idea of who these people are, but we have this, and it's not like, okay, I know exactly, we have a percentage of how people are moving on São Paulo compared to the baseline here. But it's based on this, you are lower day to following using your apps.
Pretty cool.
And it's cool. So if people are thinking to use this kind of measure, it's not hard to take this measure. You can go directly to Google Mobility Report. They created this exactly for the pandemic, and you can download any period of time you want. They already provide some reports, so there are some reports. But if you want to use it for your research, you can download everything and just decide the time window that you want to use on your data analysis, and it's quite easy. It's not a big deal.
Awesome. And we have a few more questions. All right, so this one is from Maria. Can we say that taking care of the elders or people with different beliefs are ways to improve your moral vision of the world?
Oh yeah, you can, for example, try to use this approach to improve the relations. It's interesting, Maria, you're talking about that, because if you see, but that now it's anecdotal, it's just examples. So if you see, I don't have data for that, but if you see in many countries, for example, and in many buildings, when people say, oh, this disease will put the elders in more dangers, blah blah blah, that thing. So some group of people start creating a kind of group to help these people taking food, taking medicines, and help them. So probably people that were not thinking on the elders before, after seeing that they need help now, they start creating approach to deal with that. So this is interesting. In Brazil, for example, there is not with the elders now. I'm going to give another example. So some communities, some poor communities in Brazil that were not receiving any help from the government, they start creating a huge sense of community to support. So there is an area in São Paulo, it's a favela, and they created a nice system to track COVID in their community without government support. So they start creating exactly this idea of cooperation between their members and to protect them. And yeah, and the interesting thing is that this experience impact other experience. So if we add this kind of behaviors.
All right, and next we have a question from Tom. Did you use any specific measurements to evaluate internalization and symbolization?
Yeah, exactly, Tom. I used the moral identity inventory from Carl Aquino. I will share my screen again if you want to take the name of the. Let me just see it again here. Blah, 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 blah.
I think it's the 2002 JPSB.
Exactly,
I can-
2002.
I can put it in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, it's this one here.
All right, probably one of the last questions from Lucia or Lucia. Were there countries for which there was a great discrepancy between the self-reported social distancing and Google mobility?
Yes, but at the end we found an effect. This effect that I showed was quite similar between countries, so we don't have much big difference between countries.
And then the last question from Peidong. There was a predictor of low trust in government that was associated with low compliance, but as you said, governments have different policies, either good or bad for dealing with COVID. So how do you analyze this?
We need to do that. We are now there is a paper published in Nature. They collect data from different policies that different countries implemented. So now we are trying to use that information to see the effects at country level. So then I'll be ready to answer you. Pardon me. Yeah.
All right, I think that was all, but on behalf of everyone, so we had I think we had 43 people from 14
Awesome.
countries coming
Awesome.
to listen to this wonderful talk. And thank you so much for telling us about this really cool research. And yeah, and in 3 weeks, we have our next speaker, but I don't have their name written down here, but you can check out our Psych Research List website to see the lineup. Thank you all so much for coming. I will.
Thank you.